Fremont Street, Tombstone, Arizona. October 26, 1881. 30 seconds, 30 shots, 3 men dead in the dirt, 2 more bleeding out before sundown. You've seen the movie, you know the scene. Lawmen striding down a dusty street to face down a gang of outlaws at the OK Corral. Good guys on one side, bad guys on the other. Here's the first problem with that. The fight didn't happen at the OK Corral. It happened in a narrow, vacant lot next to a photography studio 15 feet wide, with horses in the way. And by the time it was over, nobody could agree on who the criminals were, including the legal system that tried to figure it out. Strip away the legend, and what you're left with is 2 armed factions, a corrupt sheriff with money tied to the losing side, and a grudge that had been building for months. The paperwork said law enforcement. The record says something else. The version they sold you goes like this. Tombstone was a lawless hellhole. The Earps rode in to clean it up, and the cowboys were the villains standing in the way of civilization. Not one part of that holds up. Tombstone in 1881 had ordinances, functioning courts, 2 competing newspapers, and a political machine fighting hard for control of Cochise County. It was not the absence of law that made the place dangerous. It was that 2 different groups both thought they were the law, and neither one was willing to back down. Virgil Earp held the city marshal position. Wyatt was working federal assignments as a deputy marshal. But Wyatt also wanted the county sheriff's job, which meant unseating the man already sitting in it. That man was Johnny Bean, and the 2 of them were going to end up on opposite sides of the same gunfight. You decide how impartial either one was. The cowboys weren't a roving gang of bandits riding in to rob stagecoaches. They were a loose network of ranchers, rustlers, and border traders with deep roots in Cochise County and actual political support from the people who lived there. Ranches connected to the Clanton and McLaury families ran cattle on both sides of the Mexico border and had ties to local merchants, lawmen, and elected officials. These weren't outsiders. They were the community. Behan wasn't just ineffective at controlling them. In 1997, researchers turned up documents showing he'd co-signed a loan for Ike Clanton during the period of the preliminary hearing. That's not a lawman trying to hold the peace. That's a man with skin in the game. Now look at what Wyatt was doing in the months before the gunfight. He was trying to cut a deal with Ike Clanton, offering reward money in exchange for information on the men behind the Benson stage robbery. Names for cash. He wanted that collar because it would help him in the next election. That's politics wearing a badge. The gun ordinance Virgil was supposedly enforcing that afternoon was real. Tombstone had banned firearms within city limits, same as most boomtowns did. But the decision to walk down Fremont Street 4 men deep, with Doc Holliday hiding a shotgun under his coat, wasn't a duty. It was a choice, and everyone in that lot knew it. So if this wasn't law versus outlaws, what actually lit the fuse that morning? It started the night before, at the Occidental Saloon. Ike Clanton had been drinking, and he cornered Doc Holliday with an accusation that cut straight to the bone. That Holliday had been spreading word about Ike's secret deal with the Earps, the one where Ike agreed to finger the Benson stage robbery suspects in exchange for reward money. Inside the cowboy network, that kind of information didn't just damage your reputation, it got you killed. Ike wasn't angry. He was scared, and scared men do loud, stupid things. Holliday wasn't the kind of man who let an accusation pass quietly. The argument escalated. Virgil, Morgan, and Wyatt stepped in before it went further, and Wyatt walked Holliday back to his room at Fly's lodging house. Situation handled, except it wasn't. Ike sat down at a poker table with Virgil Earp, Tom McLaury, and Johnny Bean and played cards until sunrise. Think about what that scene looks like. A man who'd just threatened a gunfight sitting across from the city marshal, losing money and getting drunker, while the sheriff of Cochise County watched it all and did nothing. By the time the game ended, Ike was stumbling out into the morning streets, telling anyone who'd listen that there was going to be a fight. Several witnesses heard him. One of them woke Wyatt up to pass the warning along. Wyatt went back to sleep. By mid-morning, Ike was still moving through town with a rifle and a revolver, which put him in direct violation of the ordinance the Earps had been hired to enforce. Virgil and Morgan ran him down, and Virgil cracked him across the skull with a pistol barrel before dragging him before Judge Wallace. The fine was $25. Ike paid it. Nobody cooled down. What happened outside the courthouse was worse. Wyatt ran into Tom McLaury on the street, and without a warrant, without an arrest, without any legal authority at all, he pistol whipped him on the spot. No fine, no judge, just a message delivered at the end of a gun butt. Tom McLaury walked away bleeding, and whatever restraint was left in the situation walked away with him. Frank McLaury and Billy Clanton rode into town that afternoon, heard what had been done to their brother and their friend, and went straight to Spangenberg's gun shop. Frank and Billy bought ammunition. The shop owner refused to sell Ike another weapon. By that point, it probably didn't matter. Virgil knew the cowboys were still armed and gathering on Fremont Street. He asked Bean to go handle the disarming. Bean said he'd take care of it. The Earps waited 20 minutes. Then a businessman named John Funk came to tell them the cowboys were still there, still armed, and going nowhere. That's when Virgil handed Holliday the short-barreled Wells Fargo shotgun. Holliday tucked it under his long coat and handed Virgil his walking stick in return. It was the kind of swap that only makes sense if both men already knew how the afternoon was going to end. The four of them walked down Fremont Street together. Virgil, Wyatt, Morgan, and Holliday with a hidden shotgun and a borrowed cane. What happened in those 30 seconds is where the record gets ugly, and the witnesses start lying. Picture the lot. 15 feet wide, horses tied at one end, a photography studio on one side, a boarding house on the other. 5 cowboys bunched into that space: Ike Clanton, Billy Clanton, Frank McLaury, Tom McLaury, and Billy Claiborne. 4 men walking toward them from the street. This was not a standoff. There was no room for one. The cowboys were carrying revolvers. Frank McLaury had his on his hip. Billy Clanton the same. A rifle sat in the scabbard on one of the horses close enough to reach. Holliday had the concealed Wells Fargo shotgun under his coat, a short-barreled 10-gauge, the kind of weapon you bring when you are not planning to miss. The Earps carried revolvers. Nobody was there to talk. Virgil raised his walking stick and ordered them to give up their guns. What happened in the next 2 seconds is the question historians have been arguing about for over a century, and the honest answer is, the record does not settle it cleanly. Here's what it does settle. Holliday put the shotgun into Tom McLaury at close range. Whether Tom was armed is still contested. Witnesses on the cowboy side said he had been disarmed earlier. Witnesses on the Earp side said he had a rifle within reach. What is not contested is that he took a load of buckshot to the chest and died within the hour. That is not a warning shot. That is an execution range. Billy Clanton was hit almost immediately. He went down against the wall of the boarding house and kept firing from the ground, working the hammer with his left hand after his right wrist took a round. He was 19 years old. He died that afternoon. Frank McLaury made it out of the lot and into Fremont Street before he fell. Morgan Earp and Holliday both claimed the shot that finished him. The record does not pick a winner on that one either. Ike Clanton grabbed Wyatt's arm and said he was unarmed. Wyatt told him to get out or fight. Ike ran. Billy Claiborne ran. The fight was 30 seconds, start to finish. Now here's where the testimony falls apart. Behan told Virgil, right after the smoke cleared, that one of the cowboys had reached for a weapon. That's the man who supposedly tried to stop the whole thing, privately confirming the Earps version of events the moment it was over. Then, at the coroner's inquest, his story changed entirely. Suddenly, the cowboys had their hands up. Suddenly, the Earps fired first. The shift wasn't subtle, and Deputy District Attorney Winfield Scott Williams testified at the Spicer hearing that Behan's immediate account and his inquest testimony didn't match. Addie Borland ran a dressmaking shop directly across from the lot. She watched the whole thing from her window. Her testimony was straightforward. She saw no hands raised in surrender, not one. That directly contradicted Behan, Ike Clanton, Billy Claiborne, and every other cowboy witness who took the stand. The two Tombstone newspapers printed opposite versions the next morning. The epitaph said the Earps were lawmen who faced down armed resistors. The Nugget said the cowboys were shot while trying to comply. Both papers had political reasons to print exactly what they printed, and both knew it. The epitaph backed the Earp faction. The Nugget's publisher was Behan's undersheriff. Justice Spicer ruled on December 1st that the Earps and Holiday would not stand trial. People have been calling that an exoneration ever since. It was not. Spicer said the evidence was too conflicting to guarantee a conviction. That is a different verdict entirely. It means nobody could prove it cleanly either way, which is about as honest a summary of the whole affair as you're gonna find. The ruling did not end it. Within 2 months, someone ambushed Virgil on the street and shattered his arm. Morgan was shot dead at a billiard table. Wyatt responded by killing his way across the territory on what he called the vendetta ride, and the legal system that could not decide who the criminals were in December had no better answer by spring. That's the real story of the OK Corral, not a victory for law and order. A political grudge with guns played out in a 15-foot lot that nobody ever fully answered for. If you want more history where the record contradicts the legend, subscribe to Saddle and Smoke and check out the next video.